of what they were used for, and it's still quite a puzzle and a mystery to historians what function they actually serve.
For nearly 200 years, one Roman object has sat in museum cases under a label that quietly admits nobody knows what it is. A hollow bronze cage, 12 faces, circular holes of different sizes, 20 small knobs at the corners, more than 130 of them pulled from the soil of the old frontier. A Roman dodecahedron is remarkable and unusual because there's not many more than 100 known to exist, and not a single written word from Rome explaining why they exist. Every guess has been wrong, every theory has collapsed, and now a perfectly preserved specimen has come out of sealed ground in Lincolnshire, England. And what the laboratory found sealed inside it is the exact reason Rome kept this thing out of the record. The object Rome refused to explain. Before we look at what was found inside the Norton Disney object, you need to understand why its outer shell is already a historical problem. The Roman Empire was obsessive about documentation. This was a civilization that recorded everything: the construction methods of aqueducts, the engineering specifications of military roads, the grain invoices issued to frontier legions, the weights and measures used in every province, every tool, every weapon, every domestic device of real value. All of it survives in the technical manuals written by scholars like Vitruvius and Pliny the Elder. If the Romans made it, they wrote about it. And yet, the object we now call the Roman dodecahedron is a complete anomaly. Here's what nobody mentions when this thing sits behind museum glass. It is not a crude toy. It is not a flawed casting. To produce a hollow 12-faced bronze polyhedron, an ancient craftsman needed the lost wax casting technique at its most advanced. That process demanded extremely high furnace temperatures, deep knowledge of metallurgy to ensure the bronze alloy flowed evenly into every corner of the mold, and exceptional skill to attach small spherical knobs to each of the 20 vertices where the pentagonal faces meet. The cost of the bronze combined with the hours of specialized labor made each of these objects genuinely expensive to produce. More than 130 examples have now been discovered across Europe. And despite that relatively large number, no two are identical. They vary in overall size, they vary in the diameters of the 12 circular holes. But the strangest feature of all is not the physical variation. The strangest feature is the complete absence of information. Think about what that actually means. Not a single one of these expensive bronze objects carries a number, a measurement mark, an identifying symbol, or a maker's stamp. There are no inscriptions, there are no owner marks, and across every surviving Roman mural, every piece of sculpture, every administrative text, every military manual, every philosophical work, every letter, every inventory ever recovered from the Roman world, the dodecahedron is never depicted. It is never described, it is never mentioned. An object this complex, this expensive, and this technically demanding could not have circulated across the Roman provinces for generations without instructions, without standardization, without a single bureaucrat writing it down. In an empire that stamped its ownership on every brick and every coin, the total absence of writing on these dodecahedrons cannot be dismissed as an oversight. Something else is going on. The deliberate removal of every technical indicator, combined with the refusal of the Roman state to record these objects in any archive, points at something the official historical narrative has never been prepared to face. And the intact specimen pulled from sealed ground at Norton Disney is the one that finally made it impossible to look away. The discovery that changed everything. The silence in the written record is not harmless neglect. It appears to be a deliberate act of concealment. And this becomes impossible to ignore once you look at exactly how the Norton Disney dodecahedron was found. Most Roman metal artifacts are discovered by amateur detectorists in fields, in riverbeds, in disturbed topsoil, turned up by plows, or shifted by centuries of flooding. The Norton Disney object was not like that. It was excavated by the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, a local volunteer team working under professional archaeological supervision. And it came out of the ground under strict protocols, deep underground, inside what researchers describe as a sealed context. A sealed context means the layer of soil surrounding the object has remained completely undisturbed from the moment it was buried until the moment the excavation team removed it. No later human activity cut through it. No natural event churned it. Nothing moved, which means the dodecahedron was not casually dropped by a passing soldier. It was not lost by an inattentive craftsman. It was placed into the ground deliberately, with care, accompanied by fragments of pottery and a small group of ancient coins. Then it was covered over and left behind. And get this, its physical condition only deepens the problem. The Norton Disney dodecahedron retains a smooth, almost unblemished patina. It is completely intact, no cracks, no evidence of being melted down for scrap, no wear, no damage, no chipping on any of the 20 small knobs at its vertices. Members of the excavation team described handling something that looked as though it had been made the day before. In the ancient world, bronze was extremely valuable. Broken or obsolete bronze was almost always melted down and reforged into weapons, tools, or fittings. No one in the Roman provinces would dig a deep pit to carefully bury a fully functional, expensive, reusable bronze object, unless they had a reason that overrode the ordinary economics of the time. If the owner had been hiding it from thieves or invaders, as was common with coin hoards, they would have marked the location and come back once the danger passed. But the dodecahedron stayed in the ground for almost 2,000 years. The person who buried it either never intended to retrieve it or never had the chance. Think about what that actually means. Lowering a finely crafted, perfectly intact bronze object into the darkness and leaving it there forever does not look like an act of preservation. It looks like an act of disposal. It looks like someone trying to get rid of something that had moved beyond ordinary control, or trying to conceal an item that may have been strictly forbidden under the laws of its time. And the question every researcher who has examined the Norton Disney recovery has been forced to ask is the one the Romans did everything possible to prevent anyone asking. Forbidden for what? Every theory collapses. To understand why anyone would bury an object like this and then erase it from history, we need to confront the uncomfortable fact that every practical explanation offered over the last 2 centuries has failed. Researchers have been desperate to find a normal use for these things. They have proposed that the dodecahedron was a candle holder, a glove knitting tool, a standard weight for merchants, a range-finding device for Roman artillery, a surveyor's instrument, a pocket sundial, a toy, a religious medallion, a coin-testing device. Every one of these theories has been tested. Every one of them has failed. Take the candle holder theory. This gained traction because traces of wax were found on a small number of specimens. But the design immediately contradicts the function. With open holes on every single face, it cannot retain melted wax. More damning, there are no traces of soot on the inner surface, no burn marks on the outer metal, no heat discoloration anywhere, all of which would be unavoidable if it had been used as a light source on any regular basis. Later analysis confirmed that the wax residue almost certainly came from the surrounding soil. The knitting tool theory collapses just as quickly. Modern demonstrations show you can loop yarn through the knobs to produce small tubular forms. But Roman textile work relied on a technique known as nail binding, which uses a single needle and a ball of thread. If the dodecahedron had been a daily handheld knitting tool, its surface would show obvious wear. Microscopic analysis reveals no abrasion on the hole edges, no polishing on the knobs, no microfibers of wool inside any of the more than 130 specimens examined. Now, here's where it gets strange. The rangefinder, surveyor, and coin testing theories all fail for the same underlying reason: standardization. A military rangefinder needs precise calibration, yet no 2 dodecahedrons share identical dimensions. The 12 holes vary within a single object, without any consistent mathematical ratio, and there are no alignment markings or fixed axis. Roman surveyors already had the groma, a documented instrument, with cross arms and plumb lines that appears in Roman writings, in Roman artwork, and in the graves of surveyors marked by inscribed stones. The dodecahedron appears in none of those places. Ancient coin testers had calibrated holes of a single known diameter, matching the standard coins of the realm. The dodecahedron's 12 holes vary wildly and match no known Roman coin standard. The pocket sundial theory fails because the object has no gnomon, no engraved hour lines, and no markings that could cast or read a shadow. Every attempt to assign the dodecahedron a functional role in daily life has failed. It cannot hold liquid. It cannot measure distance. It cannot support repeated physical contact without leaving wear marks. It is hollow. It is full of holes. It is not standardized. It carries no inscriptions. And yet, it was expensive enough to represent serious time and resources invested by highly skilled craftsmen. So, if this asymmetric structure full of openings served no purpose in the mechanical world of the living, the question stops being, what did it do? The question becomes, what was it not supposed to touch? The hidden border of the Roman world. The answer does not lie in the shape of the object. It lies in where the object was hidden. When you plot the locations of the more than 130 discovered dodecahedrons on a map, a pattern emerges that the early researchers simply refused to see. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. These objects never appear in the heart of Rome. They are completely absent from the Italian peninsula. They do not turn up in Spain or in the wealthy eastern provinces like Egypt or Syria. They are not found in the major workshop cities. They do not appear inside central military camps. They do not appear in the provincial capitals. Every single known example clusters along the northern and northwestern edges of the Roman Empire. They are concentrated in the regions corresponding to modern Gaul, Germania, and Britannia. These were not the rational core of Roman civilization. These were frontier zones, borderlands where Celtic traditions, Druidic belief systems, and indigenous spiritual practices continued to flow quietly beneath the rigid surface of Roman law. The distribution map of these objects is not just a map of geography. It is a map of the boundary between two completely different systems of thought. And get this, even more revealing is the exact context of where they were found within those regions. The dodecahedrons are rarely discovered inside dense Roman settlements. They are not found in villas. They are not found in market towns. They appear near ancient burial grounds, near shallow river crossings, near wells, near natural boundaries that separated villages from deep forest. In the spatial logic of ancient belief systems, particularly within Celtic traditions, rivers and graves were not ordinary landscape features. They were liminal spaces, thresholds where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead became thin. These were the places where the old pre-Roman peoples believed contact could be made with whatever lay on the other side. Before we go further, I need to say something to you directly. This channel exists to dig the things the historical record buried back into the light. The Norton Disney team pulled one object out of the English soil after 2,000 years of deliberate silence. But there are thousands more like it, still in the ground, still sitting in museum basements, still hiding behind labels that quietly lie about what they are. If you want more of these recoveries, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below telling me which object you want us to unbury next. Every subscriber makes it harder for the silence to hold. Now, back to the border. This detail connects directly to the complete silence of the Roman administrative record. The Roman state documented every mechanical tool in meticulous detail, but it also enforced harsh laws against unsanctioned religious practices under measures like the Lex Cornelia. Acts associated with magic, divination, and communication with the dead were criminalized and in some cases punished by execution. Roman forces carried out active military campaigns to eliminate Druidic priesthoods in Britannia. The destruction of the Druidic stronghold on the island of Anglesey in the 1st century is one of the most infamous examples. Within that political climate, several separate facts converge into a single picture: the absence of inscriptions, the lack of physical wear, the deliberate burial in places associated with death, the clustering at the northern frontier. They all point the same direction. This was not a tool of daily life. This was an object brought out of concealment only for brief moments, used for a purpose outside the practical mechanical world, in darkness, in sacred spaces, then returned quickly to the ground to avoid the scrutiny of Roman authority. And that leaves one question still sitting at the bottom of the trench. What did the Norton Disney object have sealed inside it when the soil closed over it for the last time? What was found inside? This is where the story stops being archaeology and starts being forensics. After the Norton Disney dodecahedron was lifted from the sealed context, It was transferred to a laboratory for the kind of chemical analysis that was not possible a generation ago. Across late 2024 and into 2025, the specimen and several other well-preserved dodecahedrons from comparable frontier sites were subjected to mass spectrometry and radiometric isotope analysis. With the work coordinated through the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group and partner institutions, the team did not look at the outer surface. They went deep into the hollow interior, extracting microscopic organic molecules that had remained trapped inside the porous metal for nearly 2,000 years. What came back from the lab was not metal residue. It was not wool fibers. It was not ordinary soil contamination. The residue profile identified stearic acid, a form of animal fat altered by heat, alongside pine resin and lavender oil, three substances historically associated with fuel, ritual purification, scented smoke, and embalming materials used in funerary rituals during the Iron Age and within Romano-Celtic contexts. The presence of burnt animal fat meant the object had been exposed to a controlled high-temperature source inside its hollow core. Something had been set on fire inside the dodecahedron. But the most disturbing data shattered any remaining attempt to classify the object as harmless. Mixed within the burnt fat residue were high concentrations of calcium phosphate combined with carbon microparticles. Further isotopic analysis pointed to a single origin: cremated human bone. The bone traces were not recent contamination. The isotopic signature matched the chemistry of bone tissue cremated in the specific conditions, typical of the Iron Age and early Roman period. The calcium phosphate had fused with the carbon microparticles in patterns that only form when bone is exposed to sustained fire in the presence of organic fat. This was not an object that happened to be buried in a cemetery and picked up passing contamination. This was an object that had been used deliberately and repeatedly to burn mixtures that included the remains of dead humans. Members of the analysis team have spoken publicly about what it felt like to read the numbers on the chromatography printout for the first time. Decades of careful theorizing about weights, knitting, and military instruments overturned in a single set of readings. One team member reportedly said that holding the object in the field had been one thing, but reading the lab report was another thing entirely. The Roman dodecahedron is not a measuring tool. It is not a passive decorative form. It is an object that contains and was designed to burn the physical remains of human beings. This forensic evidence creates a direct contradiction with everything we thought we knew. In both Roman and Celtic funerary traditions, the remains of the dead were treated with strict care. After cremation, the ashes and bone fragments were carefully collected and sealed inside tightly closed ceramic or glass urns, protected from wind and moisture. Preserving the integrity of the remains was considered essential for the afterlife. And yet, the dodecahedron defies that principle entirely. It is open on every face. 12 holes lead directly into its hollow center. Placing ashes, animal fat, and aromatic resins inside a structure like that offers no preservation at all. A single movement of air would be enough to disperse everything inside. This design was never meant to contain or protect the silence of the dead. It was built to interact with the surrounding environment. It was built to let things out. Why would anyone place the remains of the dead into an object specifically designed to let everything escape? The device that released the dead. This contradiction only begins to resolve when you stop viewing the openings as flaws in a container and start viewing them as functional elements in a system of airflow. The final conceptual piece came from an unexpected place, one surviving monastic folklore tradition preserved in a 12th century Latin manuscript in a remote European monastery and long dismissed by mainstream scholarship as medieval embellishment, describes a device referred to as a sacred sphere pierced across 12 faces and crowned at its points, used by local priests to hear the voices of those who sleep within stone. The passage is not definitive evidence. It is not a Roman source, but when you hold it against the chemistry coming out of the Norton Disney laboratory and the physical geometry of the object itself, a new interpretation emerges that is difficult to dismiss. Here's what nobody mentions when this thing sits behind museum glass. This was not a passive container for ashes. It functioned as a specialized combustion chamber governed by airflow. The 12-sided geometry, combined with openings of varying diameters across opposing faces, is not random. In modern physics terms, that kind of structure creates a complex system of airflow regulation. When a mixture of combustible animal fat, smoke-producing resin, and human ash is ignited inside the hollow core, the geometry controls the process. The differently sized openings regulate the intake of oxygen, sustaining combustion inside the chamber. At the same time, they direct the movement of heat, scent, and most importantly, smoke. As heated air carrying microscopic ash particles is forced through the smaller upper openings, pressure increases and accelerates the flow, releasing the smoke in narrow directed streams rather than a formless cloud. And get this, the small spherical knobs at each vertex elevate the object above the flat surface it rests on, allowing continuous airflow to enter from below. The knobs were never decoration. They were legs. They were part of the breathing system of the object. Now, place this device in its intended setting, an enclosed ritual environment, a tent, a cave, a sealed burial chamber with a single low opening for ventilation. Place the dodecahedron at the center. Ignite the mixture inside. Think about what that actually means. What happens is not an ordinary fire. The smoke from the burning human remains, the animal fat, and the aromatic resins would not disperse randomly. It would be shaped by the object, channeled through the 12 openings, projected into the space in symmetrical twisting patterns, accompanied by shifting pentagonal shadows cast along the walls by the internal flame. The dead were not simply honored in this ritual. Their remains were actively dispersed into the air, inhaled by the living, breathed in by the ritual participants, creating an intense state of psychological and spiritual connection with the deceased that modern language would call a necromantic rite. This object was not designed to contain the dead. It was designed to release them into the environment and into the lungs of the people standing in the room with it. And if that is what it was built to do, then the artifacts quietly displayed behind glass in museums across Europe are not neutral curiosities. They are surviving ritual hardware. And the modern institutions holding them have known or suspected for longer than they have admitted. The truth, they tried to hide the implications of this interpretation, have triggered a quiet but firm reaction within the heritage community. Faced with chemical evidence that could not simply be dismissed, modern archival and museum systems have responded with hesitation. And the pattern mirrors uncomfortably closely the way the Roman authorities themselves appear to have behaved. They withdraw, they conceal, following internal reports in 2025 that confirmed calcium phosphate residues and microscopic traces of burnt human bone inside several well-preserved specimens. Local museums across Europe quietly removed their dodecahedrons from public display under the official justification of reassessing conservation conditions. This kind of response is not unprecedented. For decades, the British Museum kept its dodecahedron in storage, declining to put it on public exhibition until 2014. In the Netherlands, a national museum labeled its Stol specimen as a Roman weight for years, despite the obvious geometric inconsistency with any standard Roman weight system. Labeling it as a weight let the museum avoid the uncomfortable task of explaining an artifact that did not fit inside any established historical framework. The deeper discomfort is ideological. Western historical narratives have long framed the Roman Empire as the pinnacle of rationality, law, and mechanical sophistication. Acknowledging that the dodecahedron, crafted with some of the most advanced metallurgical skill of its era, may not originate from Roman rationalism at all, but from pre-Roman indigenous traditions, with a precise empirical understanding of airflow used in necromantic ritual, would fracture that image. It would suggest that the cultures the Roman Empire dismissed as primitive and barbaric actually possessed forms of applied knowledge and technical design that the Romans themselves did not fully understand. The old frontier peoples had figured out, through centuries of empirical trial, how to use controlled combustion and geometric airflow to produce a specific psychological and spiritual effect during funeral rites. This was a genuine technology with its own internal rules. And Roman authority, when confronted with that knowledge at the northern frontier, responded not by integrating it into their own body of science, but by suppressing it, criminalizing it, and refusing to write it down. The object we now politely call the Roman dodecahedron may carry a name rooted in geometry and empire, but both labels function as masks. They conceal a past shaped by fire, by forbidden ritual, and by the physical remains of the dead that were deliberately breathed into the air by the living. The fact that more than 130 of these objects have survived, scattered along the old frontier, while not a single Roman author ever admitted they existed, tells us exactly which parts of history the empire wanted erased. And the intact specimen lifted from sealed Lincolnshire soil is the one that finally made the erasure impossible. If you made it to the end of this video, you're the kind of person who wants the version of history that does not come wrapped in marble. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and let me know in the comments which artifact you want investigated next. There are more objects out there that the official record has refused to explain.